no family relation with the Johnson family, as I have with Tom Johnson and his family, as far as I can tell, is a former librarian from the University of Alabama who has authored 4 books and contributed chapters to 2 collections. His first 2 books from State University of New York Press were groundbreaking studies of the Theosophical Society's early years. His chapter in the current collection, Imagining the East, reports new research findings on the Bengali Renaissance as a background for the Theosophical Society mission in India. As co-editor with Dr. Bowen of the Letters to the Sage, he had to transcribe, annotate, and index letters from dozens of early TS members, as well as members of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. His presentation is called In Search of Zanoni, a literary pseudonym, Thomas H. Burgoyne and Norman Astley. The topic is the following. In 1886, Thomas Moore Johnson conducted a brief investigation into the pseudonyms of the men known to him as Thomas Henry Burgoyne. We'll see in a moment that was only one of several names that this individual took on, whose letters in Osceola are now crucial evidence in Paul Johnson's ongoing investigation of the same name. Paul Johnson, and you.
I just want to start by thanking everybody here, but especially my co-editor, Patrick Bowen, for letting me be part of this project, which has both been the hardest work I've ever done, including all my own books, and the most fun. The hardest work part is one thing: Alexander Wilder's handwriting. Is the first I've ever seen in my life. Confirming every stereotype about medical doctors, not wanting you to be able to read what they write. And if Alexander Wilder's handwriting in English was not enough of a challenge, I thought I had a lady in Greece agreeing to transcribe all of his Greek, and then reached a point where she said, no, you transcribe all the Greek and then I fixed it. Well, the fixing was a nightmare because, of course, I'm totally illiterate in it. But it was still a wonderful experience. So what is a small-town public librarian doing as a thorn amidst all these academic roses? And the reason I'm here is mainly because I'm a small-town public library director from Virginia, or was. Succession of little towns the size of Osceola. And one thing that as a Virginia small-town librarian you get a lot of, especially in the summer, is people from all over the country thronging to you looking for their ancestors. And so I got to be a real whiz kid at Ancestry.com, which was a tremendous tool. Letters to the Sage would not have been half as valuable as it now is if we tried to do it 20 years ago, when there was no way to find out anything about all these minor characters that we now have documented fairly well. So I have also something in common with Thomas Moore Johnson, and I think I'm the only person in the world who can say this, which is that I have an equal amount of life experience with the Theosophical Society and the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, or rather the Church of Light, which is its present-day successor. And so I could understand the situation in which he found himself when in his 30s he got sucked into this vortex of conflict between these two groups, because I've been there too. And at the same age, by the way, we were both out of it by age 40. So the other thing that we have in common is that we both conducted investigations of the pseudonyms of Thomas Henry Burgoyne. As president of the American Council of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, Johnson chaired a meeting of the executive committee in Kansas City on July 12, 1886. 2 of the 3 letters from Johnson himself that we have in the collection concern his investigation. And here's the quote: "The matter of certain charges involving the identity of one T.H. Burgoyne with one T.H. Dalton was in consideration in connection with documentary evidence furnished by various persons and also evidence furnished by Mr. Burgoyne." Johnson reports that all evidence presented was carefully examined, and the opinion unanimously arrived at was that T.H. Burgoyne and T.H. Dalton was one and the same person. Johnson then advised all members to have nothing to do with either Burgoyne or Peter Davidson, with whom he come to America, until the charges had been refuted. On September 6th, which is less than 2 months later, it was resolved at a subsequent meeting that the charges against Burgoyne are, quote, not worthy of further attention on the part of this council, but nothing was said about lifting a ban on communication with Peter Davidson. My guess is that Burgoyne said, yes, I did this, I changed my name, Davidson made me do it. Something like that would get one of them off the hook, but not the other. But who knows, I shouldn't be speculating. But, because right now what I want to do, not only have I had sort of real life experience with the Church of Life and the Theosophical Society, there's been kind of equal interest in this project from both. And actually, if Vadim had asked me, should I be identified as, coming from the Church of Light, I would have said no, but I'm glad you did. Because they deserve tremendous credit, not for, if Theosophical Society was behind somebody's name, you know that the Theosophical Society approved the content of what they were saying and it fulfilled the party line, because otherwise they wouldn't let you put their name. The Church of Light has never once, in 15 years of membership, indicated any interest whatsoever in influencing any of my conclusions about any of this. They've been totally supportive of all of my investigations. And indeed, I started the thing that I'm going to report to you now way back in 2011. I gave a presentation to the Church of Light about Astley and Burgoyne. So TMJ solved the mystery of where Burgoyne came from. I have solved, and I hope it's not arrogant to say this, the mystery of where he went. He was believed to have died in 1894. He did not. And there's some real interesting reasons why. So the Church of Light gave me an hour to talk about all this in July in Albuquerque. At a Theosophical History conference in Greece, I had 10 minutes to boil it all down to an absent presentation, which was narrated in PowerPoint. And that's what we have here. It's just all the evidence, and then after it's just 10 minutes, then I'll talk about how we connect the dots and what this evidence means. Jump drive. Okay.
There you go.
That's PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay, I wondered why Adobe was even trying to do anything. with PowerPoint.
Provides many
Okay,
letters
now,
and documents
I gotta stop while we're going.
which help
Okay. Hold on, guys.
This birth register provides the date.
There.
This birth register provides
Close off. Here.
the Thomas More Johnson correspondence provides many letters and documents from Thomas Henry Burgoyne, which help to shed light on the development of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor in the U.S. By comparison with another set of letters that emerged in 2016 in Western North Carolina, we can now celebrate real progress in solving the mysteries surrounding Burgoyne's later life. This birth register provides the date and place of his birth and the names of his parents. Son of Chiropodist Thomas Henry Dalton and his wife, the former Emma Rice, he was born April 14, 1855, in Douglas, Isle of Man. Zanoni, which Dalton used as a pen name for more than 5 years, was the title character of the 17th of 28 novels by Edward Bulwer Lytton, who was as prolific and popular in his time as Charles Dickens. The popularity of this novel in 19th century America is attested by its title appearing as a place name adopted by rural crossroads communities in Virginia and Missouri. Their now abandoned post offices illustrate the decline of Bulwer Lytton's literary reputation. Emma Harding Britton's memoirs described a group of esoteric researchers she joined in her youth, calling them the Orphic Circle and naming Bulwer Lytton as the leader of the group. Despite being bitter rivals late in life, Madame Blavatsky and Emma Harding Britton had both regarded Bulwer Lytton as an adept during the early New York years of the TF, and continued to do so thereafter. Burgoyne's birth chart, with the date of April 14, 1855, appears in Volume 1 of the Brotherhood of Light books, Laws of Occultism. Author Elbert Benjamin singles out the Light of Egypt as crucial to his own studies, specifying the 1889 first edition. Although Dalton's three known mentor figures were remarkably diverse in ethnic and religious backgrounds, they were misidentified with one another, as hopeless confusion reigns in published sources about the identity and pseudonyms of the original Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor leaders, confusion that extended to Burgoyne and all his mentors. Dalton's need for a pseudonym was due to his record of arrest and 6 months prison time for obtaining money under false pretenses. In 1886, he entered the United States as Thomas Henry Burgoyne in the company of Peter Davidson and family as they relocated to the mountains of North Georgia. But within weeks, he moved on to Kansas, Colorado, and then California, living with various members of the Brotherhood, working on what became The Light of Egypt, which was published in 1889. After public accusations from Blavatsky and Judge that she had written The Light of Egypt, Emma Harding Britton denied it indignantly while praising the author and the book. Even though she did not write it, Britton saw the book as vindicating her view of the early TS. Sarah Stanley Grimke is identified in several sources as the author or co-author of parts of The Light of Egypt. And my interest originally in the Johnson correspondence was inspired by the hope that her role in the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor would be illuminated by the letters. This led first to an examination of Grimke family correspondence in Washington, D.C., and later to a study of Christian Science and Unitarian records in Boston in order to document Sarah's background. Grimke was far better educated than either Burgoyne or Britton, which might be the source of the latter's extolling Zanoni's qualifications. But evidence in letters to the sage makes it clear that most of The Light of Egypt came from manuscripts Burgoyne had written before coming to America. In the summer of 1891, this announcement appeared for a forthcoming book, but Celestial Dynamics was not in fact published until 1896, and it was authored by Zanoni with no reference to the name T.H. Burgoyne. The next year, Zanoni emerges as an astrology teacher in the first publication of Astrophilosophical Publications of Denver. Language of the Stars in 1892 does not mention the name Burgoyne. Also, and importantly, in 1892, Norman Astley married Teresa Thompson in Boston. This marriage document conflicts in multiple ways with other documents about the two partners. Genevieve Stebbins had married Joseph Thompson in 1888 and was partnered with his sister Mary in her New York business, which attracted such clients as Mrs. Pierpont Morgan and Mrs. John D. Rockefeller. These portraits date from this period. The only evidence of a connection between Burgoyne and Stebbins in the 1880s is his recommending her writings in his private lessons to his pupils, in undated letters quoted in a 1999 edition of The Light of Egypt. This is the Stebbins family genealogy, with 6 changes from the information in the Boston marriage record. The spelling of Astley's name has changed. His father is now John rather than Norman, and he is now a journalist rather than an author. The entry erases the fact that Genevieve had ever been named Thompson, and corrects her mother's name from Louisa to Henrietta. Louisa was Genevieve's favorite aunt who raised her after the death of her mother. Finally, the date has been moved from June 1892 to April 1893. Astley's role as a full collaborator in Stebbins' school is evident in this 1895 press account of the myth of Isis, which they had copyrighted 2 years earlier jointly, along with the related myth of Ariadne. Burgoyne was described in 1900 as having died several years earlier and become a source of channeling Volume 2 of The Light of Egypt through Belle Wagner. But a 1930s letter from Church of Light President Benjamin to a boyhood friend in Iowa describes the Ashleys as unable to forgive the Wagners for being usurpers, presumably both of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor and of Zanoni's literary career. For 12 years, the Astleys owned property in the mountains of western North Carolina. This began shortly after their marriage and continued a dozen years until they retired to England. My original research on the Astleys was conducted at the North Carolina State Archives in Raleigh. There, deeds for land sales explain the couple's tenure in the western mountains, but the next step is going to county courthouses in Morganton and Boone, as well as libraries. Those will have more complete real estate records, as well as local newspapers of the period. Norman's life managing remote properties in Burke County was far removed from the social life of Blowing Rock with Genevieve. He resided in a rustic cabin rather than the pretty cottage he described as inhabiting with her in the town. Handwriting of Norman Astley has recently emerged from Burke County local historian Helen Norman, whose ancestors owned land formerly owned by the Astleys, where she now resides and has inherited Astley letters that can be compared with the Burgoyne letters in Missouri. Astley's first emergence in print in the UK is a letter to the British Empire Naturalist Association in December 1908, in which he enthuses about local wildlife, just as he had in his North Carolina letters of the previous decade. At this point, he is living in Devon. He relocated to Jersey, Sussex, and California with Genevieve, before finally returning to Devon after her death with his third wife, Nellie. In 1939, as a widower yet again, in Plymouth, Norman gave his date of birth for the census as April 14, 1855, the same date as in the Dalton Birth Register and the natal chart of Burgoyne. Neil Cantwell is trained in forensic document analysis and concludes on the basis of abundant written evidence that Astley's handwriting is identical to Burgoyne's in many definitive ways, from individual letters to common words like "thee" or "and," and especially signatures. Further light on Astley is provided by The Quest of the Spirit, published in 1913, with Genevieve Stebbins listed as editor and the author of Pilgrim of the Way. I have excerpted the seemingly autobiographical passages from the book and published them as my latest blog entry at adepts.light.org, and also have submitted the same as a paper to academia.edu. And I refer everyone interested in Astley to this book as the sole source of evidence of his later thinking.
Okay, now for the fun part. All the things that I would not say to a theosophical audience. We're very predisposed to a hostile view both of the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor and unfortunately the Church of Light has even heard of it. My feeling is nobody was mad at the Church of Light until I joined it and then kaboom. But, okay. TMJ found himself in a very sticky situation handling this Burgoyne mess, and for reasons not only the ones that I have enumerated in this address to the Theosophists, but also because there was an immorality element in the collaboration of Burgoyne and Grimke. Since he had abandoned his wife and children in England to come to America to be the secretary of the Hermetic Brotherhood, she had abandoned her husband and child to cross country as a New Thought teacher, became his collaborator. They lived together in sin for a year while writing his book. So the Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor, wanting to compete with the Theosophical Society, wanting to write basically like a counterattack against Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, choose as the authors of their Bible people whose life story would have immediately discredited the whole enterprise if it came out. So there's this point where somebody writes back to TMJ about all this. I think it might be McDonald saying, I agree, the less said about all this, the better. So that was kind of, why, reason number 3 of why Burgoyne had to become somebody else. The Theosophists were so angry at him over the book that they found out who he really was, knew he was an illegal immigrant having come here under a false name, threatened to find him. There's some reference to him being so scared all the time in California that every time he saw a stranger, he freaked out thinking they were coming for him. So Genevieve Stebbins, what an angel. Now what I did not get to tell is why she was able to provide Burgoyne a new identity. Well, she was a teacher of elocution and acting. She wrote the role, Norman Astley, and then taught Burgoyne how to play that role for the rest of his life. And so I always think female Henry Higgins. Nobody else. I mean, she was the only person maybe who could have rescued him from this horrible fix. And the other thing is, his publishers treated him very abusively. I've had some nightmarish publishing experience, but the idea that somebody could be your publisher and then steal your pseudonym and then tell everybody you were dead and then put out a new book saying you had channeled it from beyond. And you did not say a word saying, I'm Burgoyne and that's my book and how dare you, because then it's important or whatever. So I think, Genevieve was just such an angelic figure, but she got something out of this, obviously. She had a husband, I think there was some financial distrust there in that the business relationship with Mary Thompson busted up at the same time Genevieve's marriage to Joseph Thompson. So as far as conclusions, I think I will leave those to any Q&A beyond this, but we'll say that what I really want to emphasize here at the end is that Neil Cantwell, who did this wonderful handwriting comparison, is a retired St. Louis County police detective who doesn't have the certificate of, I'm a forensic handwriting analysis, but he got enough training to be the guy in the PD to know when it looked like forgery and when you had to call the expert. So he has been trained in this. And honestly, he talked for an hour. In the first 10 minutes, everybody was totally convinced. And it was like, why do you keep bringing up new examples? Because the handwriting is so similar. I think it's just wonderful that a Missourian is the one who helped me, nail this case. Unfortunately, he wanted to be here, had a death in the family, could not. But I want to describe his presentation. It was not a PowerPoint with some, comparable software package, but it was just, lots of fascinating details and lots of samples, but all in slide format. And what I want to do is expand what I've presented to you as a for real documentary with interviews with Neil. I have a professional filmmaker friend in Raleigh who has agreed to interview me, and I want to interview the lady in Morganton who came up with these letters. And I just, at the end here, I just want to tell you there's, all the way through this I thought, oh, he's been so trashed as a villain and so hated and he had such a terrible life, and then I'm proving that he, escaped all that and had this wonderful happy 40-year marriage. 2 things this lady in Morganton, North Carolina told me that really gave me pause. One is that after Genevieve died, he married the nurse that had been taking care of her, and then they went off to England together. I thought, okay, that's a little yes. Then she said, and the second wife died under mysterious circumstances, drowned in a bathtub. And then I looked at Genevieve's death certificate, and she died of pneumonia following a fall down the stairs. And so at the end of all this, it's like, oh my God, he murdered one wife and then murdered them. Now, all of this, I've really got to talk to this later. But anyway, so that is just how strange, the weird byways that you can end up in when you start exploring stuff like this. So if I've intrigued you enough, I guess it's time to move to Q&A, but I think Patrick deserves the honor since he left you with a lot of questions, I'm sure. So I sit back down.
All right, so Burgoyne Dalton, or however we want to call him, I thought he had three lives, and now I realize he had 4 maybe. and ended a couple of other lives in the process. If there's any question for either Paul Johnson or for Patrick Bowen, you're welcome now. And I want to say, just in the meantime, just to kind of titillate you a little bit, that both some of the letters that I've referenced and actually the manuscripts of some of the manuscripts of the Light of Egypt are actually here, right outside this very room, and Ann Baker from Special Collection is gonna, I guess, introduce us to them, to those things later on as we take a break. But first, again, I wanted to give everyone the opportunity to ask questions.
So I have a methodology question more than a content question, specifically for Paul Johnson. How did you track Astley to North Carolina? I missed that.
Oh, okay. I think there were a lot more slides that got cut for this short version. What I found was just Googling it. I found he wrote a letter in 1896, I believe, which was 4 years into the marriage, to the North Carolina Naturalist Association, saying 4 years ago I started investigating purchase of property here, and we finally bought 800 acres of farm and woodland in Burke County, and we built a pretty little cottage in Blowing. So that was what got me started on this, and then I immediately went to the state archives. Then this story, as I was telling Budine earlier, I started out being more of a believer in paranormal things in general and have become more skeptical over time. But as far as weird coincidences that help a historian find the next piece of evidence, I'm totally woo-woo about that, because all of these things have this kind of dropping from the sky quality. Most recently, last summer, I was startled to see an announcement. Lady out of the blue emails me saying, my name is Carrie Streeter, I'm a PhD student at San Diego State University. I live in Boone, North Carolina, and in 2 weeks I'm giving a presentation at the Blowing Rock Museum of Arts and Letters about Genevieve Stebbins and her life in Blowing Rock. So this was like, I had no idea anybody was even into this. Now I found there's a whole network of Stebbins scholars in the field of dance history and somatics, which I didn't know was a thing. And so they're digging up all kinds of great stuff about Genevieve, which is a big help. But I'm so far the only person interested in more. I hope that's changed today a little bit.
So we spend so much time telling our students how they shouldn't Google stuff, because that's not the right methodology.
That's how things fall from the sky.
Right.
Really what came from the sky, I have to say that third birthday, that was just a little nudge, like a month before the Church of Life presentation, we had no date of birth for Norman Astley. And it was like a little tickle, or a little voice said, go ahead and spend the extra $99 to upgrade your Ancestry.com membership to international from national. Because there's probably some little tidbit about Astley that has come up since the last time you had it 5 years ago. And the first thing that pops up is this birth date that is identical to the other two. So I owe a lot more to Ancestry.com than I do to Google.
There's another question, please.
I'm curious about the relationship between Britton Blavatsky and I guess it was Zanoni, the writings of Zanoni.
Yes.
You say that The Light of Egypt, it was published 89, but you say that much of that material already existed much earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, and Patrick's memory may help if mine fails here, but Burgoyne writes to Johnson that his wife back in England has got 3 boxes of his manuscripts that she's going to send him, and then later he says, I got the manuscript. So that sounds like that had to be a very large portion of that book. And as for the Britton-Blavatsky relationship, that's important, and I'm glad you asked that, because the Theosophist accusation in anger at Light of Egypt was saying this guy had stolen Theosophy from them, whereas what this really was, now Britton was not the author I see all of these people as using Burgoyne as a cat's paw, you know, letting him be the one to take the blame for doing what basically they were telling him to do, which is to attack Blavatsky. But from Britten's point of view, she wasn't taking anything from Blavatsky. She was taking back what had originally been hers. She wrote the first 2 books published by a founder of the Theosophical Society in 1876, Art, Magic, and Ghostland. That's where all this adepts and, you know, mystery, mythological thing starts. Then Blavatsky goes off to India and expands it to a point that Britten is extremely annoyed and angry that it reminds, you're old enough probably, there was a song by Melanie, Look What They Done to My Song, Ma. Basically, Blavatsky took something Britten had collaboratively created jointly with her and trusted her to stick with, and then just totally changed it. And Britten was forever furious because the Theosophical Society started out being friendly to spiritualists and welcoming them, and then what I got to India was viciously attacking spiritualists. And Emma felt like this betrayed the entire basis of their joint. The TS was founded in Emma's house. That gives you a sense of how much she was invested originally.
But there's a previous history with the HBL and Britain?
No.
No.
Yes, Bulwer-Lytton is the figure overshadowing those.
Oh, okay.
And speaking of overshadowing figures, Bronson Alcott was simultaneously comes across as the most revered guru figure, not only to Johnson and Wilder, also to Grimke, who was educated in Boston and acquainted with the Alcott name.
Any other question for both Paul Johnson and Patrick Bowen? All right, shall we perhaps then take a short break